Magavan and Tolkien nerds, and welcome to a new edition of Luminario, where this week we'll be mainly talking about Gondor, and specifically what is the origin of the alliance with Rohan, because they have a very special relationship. Now, there are beacons along the White Mountains which Gondor can light to call Rohan for aid, and in the book they use the device of the red arrow which they use in Crisis, in the first half of Return of the King. Black, feathered and barbed with steel, but the point was painted red. It's brought by courier to Theoden, signalling that Gondor is in dire need. Similarly, Irma talks of an old alliance when discussing Gondor with the three hunters, and the arrow courier from Denethor asks Theoden to remember old friendship and oaths long spoken. So, to get a feel for the current situation of Gondor and Rohan in the year 3019, which is when most of the bulk of Lord of the Rings takes place, we need to go back almost 1,500 years. I'm just going to shoot myself out of the way here and shrink myself down. We need to go back almost 1,500 years to see Gondor at its height. So I searched endlessly for a really good zoomable high-res map, digital one obviously, that I could use for this presentation, and the only one I could find that was really suitable was a photo of a product by these guys called Gecko Art. And as I'm using their map, I'm going to have to put a link in the show notes. They don't know I'm using it, but free advertising can't hurt, and it does look like a really, really nice wood-burn map, so I might actually have to buy one myself. So this map shows Gondor at its height. I'm just going to shrink myself a little bit further out of the way because I'm clearly right in the way here. Let's go down here. So the map shows Gondor at its original glory. On the west you've got Enedwaith, which goes up to the Greyflad, and Calanardon, which is in here, of course listed as Rohan, and that goes north to the Limelight. And out in the east is slightly blurrier. I kind of stopped it just after the Daggerlad. I couldn't find a huge amount on how far east the realm of Gondor stretched. LOTR.fandom.net suggests it goes as far east as the Sea of Ruin, but they're slightly shy on sources. I couldn't find much to back this up. But we do know that Daggerlad was Gondor, so that's where I've highlighted it too. Now you notice in the west, the Andrast, the Rath Moriel, is not part of Gondor. It wasn't inhabited by Gondorians. You can see it's called the Druaith Eorl, and it was home to the Droog, who were early people who didn't travel west. They're like some of the earliest inhabitants of Middle Earth, and they didn't travel west. They're not part of the Edain. They're related to Gan Gan, who's the messenger who helps Rohan travel through the forests to get to Minas Tirith unseen. The Droog are going to get their own pod in a couple of weeks because I really love them. They're great. The next thing to remember is that Gondor is in decline. It's slowly collapsing. You get a feel for this reading the appendix, The Tale of Years in the Return of the King. In 1437, they've got the Kinstrife, which is where an usurper comes and they have a civil war. Osgiliath is burned and the Palantir is lost. Osgiliath used to be the capital city, and during the Kinstrife it's burnt and it just collapses. The capital is then moved to Minas Arnor. Now, back in those days, it was Minas Arnor, not Minas Tirith, because Minas Arnor was a twin city with Minas Ithil, which you'll later know as Minas Morgul in the Eotheod, the Mountains of Shadow. Later on, Umbar gets taken in the south, which gives rise to the Corsairs of Umbar, and then they have the plague, and in 1636 the plague comes, and through depopulation, Enedwaith is let go. So power that disappears, and then the Wain Riders from the east. Now the Wain Riders are like the perpetual enemy of Gondor. They're part of the Easterlings, a group far off in the east past Rhûn, and they just start their assault on Gondor. They assault in 1851, and they keep the pressure on for a century, and all the lands east of Ithilien are taken. Then in 1974, the northern kingdom of Arnor collapses from the assaults of the Witch King of Angmar, who we know, of course, is the king of the Ringwraiths. The armies of Gondor with Prince Eomer, he crops up later, managed to finally defeat him, and in 1980, the Witch King of Angmar reappears in Mordor as the leader of the Nazgul with the other Ringwraiths. So 22 years pass from 1980 into 2002. And in 2002, the Ringwraiths lay siege to Minas Ithil, and after 2 years, Minas Ithil is taken, and it becomes Minas Morgul. So the Palantir was in Minas Ithil as well, and that is lost, and that's captured, and taken to Sauron. And of course, it means that Sauron can now talk to Denethor and to Saruman, obviously with disastrous consequences. Then in 2050, Eomer, who is now the king of Gondor, is lost to the Witch King. The Witch King comes before the walls of Gondor and challenges Eomer to single combat, and Eomer's like, yeah, I can take him, and wanders into Minas Morgul and is never seen again. And since 2050, Gondor is left without a king. Then in 2510, 500 years after the loss of King Eomer, we have a very interesting line in the Tale of Years, which is, Orcs and Easterlings overrun the Calenardon. Eorl the Young wins the victory of the field of Celebrant. Firstly, where's the Calenardon? That's the Calenardon, now listed as Rohan. And who is Eorl the Young? Doesn't sound a Gondorian name, and it's not. He's a Northman. So, 575 years earlier, in the year 1936, in the middle of the assaults of the Wainriders, King Narsil II leads a joint force of Gondorians and Northmen into a battle, and they meet the Wainriders just below, just in the shadow of Mirkwood. Narsil II is slain, most of his men returned to Ithilien, but some fled back north, and these became the Northmen. These became the Eotheod when they are there. Most of the lands they used to occupy around the Anduin are now regularly raided by or settled by the Wainriders, who are this great big brown splotch. All of that's Wainrider land, always heavily raided by Wainriders. And the Northmen become the Eotheod. Now, because of so much land is taken by the Wainriders, and also with regular assaults from Dol Guldur and Mirkwood, Dol Guldur is obviously where Sauron lives when he's going by the name of the Necromancer. This means that getting messengers back and forth to Gondor is really hard, so the kings actually don't really know too much about the Eotheod early on. The Wainriders continue their regular assaults, and the Gondorians discern that it's the hand of Sauron making them work in concert with the Easterlings. This is where we begin to see the decline of Gondor spiritually as well as in political might. Feats of arms and strength began to be celebrated beyond feats of intellect and philosophy. King Eomer doesn't take a wife. He defeats the Witch King in the north, obviously 1975, and then of course he's successfully goaded into walking into Minas Morgul by the Witch Kings later on. This comes up with Boromir as well. Boromir, my main G, he is absolutely fantastic character. We've got a great quote describing Boromir and Faramir. It did not seem possible to Faramir that any in Gondor could rival Boromir. Another like mind was Boromir. And this is why Denethor is so disparaging of Faramir and calls him a wizard's pupil for learning with Gandalf. In the days of Gondor's power in like 1149, tuition from the Astari would be a thing to be proud of. But in these later days of Gondor's slow collapse, if you can't swing a sword, no one cares. Well, it's also a shame, because of course Faramir is a very doughty warrior. He's a fantastic raider. His hit and run attacks in Ithilien against the Haradrim are always successful, and he balances it with a piercing mind. Boromir is said to be like Eomer in temperament. So Cirion is the steward of Gondor in 2509. This is 500 years after Eomer's disappearance and the last king dies, and it's about just over 500 years before the events of Lord of the Rings. Cirion learns that a huge army of the Balcoth, who are related to the Wainriders, is approaching from the east. He sends a message up to the Eotheod. It's an incredibly dangerous path. You can see that it's the path they'd have to take. Half the Calenardon, they don't really have control of it anymore. It's not exactly Wainrider territory, but there's always raids going through. they'd have to go over the Great River, through the Undeeps. They can't go through Lorien, of course. They'd have to go next to Dol Guldur, and then finally, hopefully, reach the Northmen in the north, and hopefully get them all in one piece. So, of course, it's a massively dangerous path. So he sends 6 messengers in pairs, 3 days apart. So he sends 2, then 2, then 2. And they're trying to speak to Eorl the Young, the new leader of the Eotheod. He became the Lord at 16, hence the name. And he's now 25. Cirion is really hoping beyond hope, knowing that Eorl has to look after his own people as well. Cirion's got no claim on Eorl's duty at all, except for their ancient friendship with their people. But after the messengers have finally gone, it's time for Cirion to prepare his army as best as possible. So he does start setting about his army, and it takes 15 days for the messengers to reach Eorl. Eorl ponders briefly, then accepts. So we're going to do a bit of a reading here. 385. Eorl took counsel with himself in silence, but not for long. Soon he rose and said, "I will come. If the Mundberg fails, whither shall we flee from the darkness?" Then he took Borondir's hand in a token of promise. Borondir was the messenger. Eorl at once summoned his council of elders and began to prepare for the great riding. But this took many days, for the host had to be gathered and mustered, and the thought taken for the ordering of the people and the defence of the land. At that time the Eotheod were at peace and had no fear of war, although it might prove otherwise when it became known that their lord had ridden away to battle far off in the south. Nevertheless, Eorl saw well that nothing less than his full strength would serve, and he must risk all or draw back and break his promise. At last the whole host was assembled, and only a few hundreds were left behind to support the men unfitted for such a desperate venture by youth or age. It was in the 6th day of the month of Verese. On that day in silence, the great Eoher set out, leaving fear behind, and taking with them small hope, for they knew not what lay before them, either on the road or at its end. It is said that Eorl led forth some 7,000 fully armed riders, and some hundreds of horsed archers. So Eorl brings almost his entire force, leaving only the very old and the very young, and then they arrive. The northern army of Gondor was in peril. Defeated in the wold and cut off from the south, it had been driven across the Limelight and was suddenly assailed by the orc host that it pressed towards the Anduin. All hope was lost when, unlooked for, riders came out of the north and broke upon the rear of the enemy. Then the fortunes of battle were reversed, and the enemy was driven with slaughter over the Limelight. Eorl led his men in pursuit, and so great was the fear that went before the horsemen of the north that the invaders of the wold were thrown into panic, and the riders hunted them over the plains of the Calanadon. So, after the battle, Eorl and Cirion ride back to Gondor together, and entering the Calanadon, Cirion tells Eorl to wait for 3 months. Everyone is wondering how Cirion will repay Eorl, and what he does is this. He goes back to Minas Tirith and tells his men to open up this hidden pathway which leads up to the holy mountain called the Heliferin. Now, this has been a holy mountain since time immemorial. It's shrouded in silence. No one lives there. People who pass by are compelled to whisper. It's also called the Amon Anwar, which is the Hill of Or. It doesn't have a beacon on top. They've got those beacons that go from Gondor all the way to Rohan, and no beacons allowed on top of it, and no one's allowed to fell any wood from the slopes. And we've got a little bit of a description here. This is what Cirion tells his men to do. Go now to the Whispering Wood. There you must reopen the ancient path of Amon Anwar. It is long overgrown, but the entrance is still marked by a standing stone by the road. The path turns this way and that, but at each turn there is a standing stone. Following these you will come at length to the end of the trees and find a stone stair that leads on upwards. I charge you go no further. Do this work as swiftly as you may, and then return to me. Fell no trees, only clear a way by which a few men on foot can easily pass. Leave the entrance by the road still shrouded, so that none that use the road may be tempted to use the path before I come there myself. Tell no one whither you go, or what you have done. If any ask, say only that the Lord Steward wishes for a place to be made ready for the meeting with the Lord of the Riders. So messengers are sent to Eorl to meet Cirion at the edge of the Merring Wood, which is there. The Heliferin isn't actually marked on this map. It's not on mine either. It's on some of the earlier ones, but in the later editions it was taken off. There that's where the Merring Stream meets the Little Wood, and they go to the Holy Mountain. Messages are sent to Cirion to meet at the edge of the Merring Wood, and Cirion and Eorl take the prepared path which leads halfway up the main Holy Mountain to the foot of the stair which we just read about. And this is what Cirion says to Eorl. Then, standing on the first step of the stair, he broke his silence, saying in a low but clear voice, I will now declare what I have resolved, with the authority of the stewards of the kings, to offer to Eorl, son of Eotheod, lord of the Eotheod, in recognition of the valour of his people, and the help beyond hope that he brought to Gondor in my dire time of need. To Eorl I will give as a free gift all of the great land of the Calanardon, from the Anduin to Isen. There, if he will, he shall be king, and his heirs after him, and his people shall dwell in freedom, while the authority of the stewards endures until the great king returns. No bond will be laid upon them other than their own laws and will, save in this only: they shall live in perpetual friendship with Gondor, and its enemies shall be their enemies, while both realms endure. But the same bond shall be laid also upon the people of Gondor. So, Eorl is obviously gobsmacked, and they go up the stair to the summit, and at the top they find a wide, flat place and a tomb. And this is where we realise why this hill is so holy, because it's the tomb of Elendil the Faithful, who escaped the downfall of Númenor, the first High King of Gondor and Arnor, wielder of the sword of Narsil, which was broken. He was killed by Sauron. And this is the most sacred place in Gondor, and if you look, it's in the very centre of Gondor as it once was. And of course now it's going to end up on the edge of Gondor and Rohan. So Eorl makes his oath first. Cirion says to him, if you are ready, take now your oath in such a manner as seems fitting according to the customs of your people. So Eorl draws his sword. Hear now, all peoples who bow not to the shadow in the east. By the gift of the Lord of the Mundburg we will come to dwell in the land that he names Calanardon, and therefore I vow in my own name and on behalf of the Eotheod of the north, that between us and the great people of the west there shall be friendship for ever. Their enemies shall be our enemies, their need shall be our need, and whatsoever evil or threat or assault may come upon them, we will aid them in the utmost end of our strength. This vow I shall descend to my heirs, all such as may come after me in our new land, and let them keep it in faith unbroken, lest a shadow fall upon them and they become accursed. Then Eorl sheathed his sword and bowed and went back to the captains. Cirion then made answer. Standing to his full height, he laid his hand upon the tomb, and his right hand held up a white wand of the stewards, and spoke words that filled those who heard them with awe. For as he stood upon, the sun went down in the flame in the west, and his white robe seemed to be on fire. And after he had vowed that Gondor should be bound by like band of friendship and aid in all need, he lifted up his voice and said in Quenya, Vanda Sinya ta Naruva, Elana Noro Alka Enalian, I Elendil Vrondo Vronwe. Natulovante Zihara Mahal Masan, Ninuman Eru or Elie Mahalma Etianio. And again he said in the common speech, This oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and on the faith of Elendil the faithful, in the keeping of those who sit upon the thrones of the west, and upon the one who is above all thrones for ever. So, following their oaths, the borders are drawn up again, and Eorl becomes the first king of the Mark. So, if you... I actually love this picture. This is Ted Nasmith. I totally grabbed it by mistake just then. That's obviously Cirion holding up the beacon, and you can see I love the way the light comes straight across like a flame in the west, and it's illuminated everything in this beautiful kind of burnished orange colour. So if you've listened this far, I'd like to do one more reading, which is really beautiful, and it's from Return of the King, where Gandalf and the three hunters walk past the barrows of the previous lords of the Mark. And I think I'll put this little bit mark in here. Already in a southern land, the willows were blushing red at their fingertips, feeling the approach of spring. Over the stream there is a ford between low banks, much trampled by the passage of horses. The travellers passed over and came upon a wide rutted track leading towards the uplands. At the foot of this walled hill the way ran under the shadow of many mounds, high and green. Upon their western sides the grass was white as with the drifted snow. Small flowers sprang there like countless stars amid the turf. Excuse me. "Look," said Gandalf, "how fair are the bright eyes in the grass. Evermind they are called, Symbol Mine in this land of men, for they blossom in all the seasons of the year and grow where dead men rest. Behold, we are come to the great barrows where the sires of Theoden sleep." "7 mounds upon the left and 9 upon the right," said Aragorn. "Many long lives of men it is since the Golden Hall was built." 500 times the red leaves have fallen in Mirkwood in my home since then," said Legolas, "and but a little while does that seem to us." "But to the riders of the Mark it seems so long ago," said Aragorn, "that the rising of this house is but a memory of song, and the years before are lost in the mist of time. Now they call this land their home, their own, and their speech is sundered from their northern king." Northern kin, that is, not king. So, that is why, when Gondor calls for aid, Rohan would answer. The land was given to them by Gondor, because without the ride of the Rohirrim, Gondor would have fallen into darkness, and of course, without Minas Tirith, if that had fallen to the Wain Riders in 2500, Sauron would have marched unobstructed from Mordor all across Middle-earth in 3019. So, if you like what you've heard, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in a week.